If you've ever wondered what it's like to stare into the heart of darkness and feel it stare back, let me take you to the edge of Black Hollow Forest. I never believed in ghosts, not really. I'd heard the stories, sure, everyone in town had. The forest was a local legend, a place where the trees grew too close together and the fog never seemed to lift. They said if you spent a night there, you'd come out changed, if you came out at all. But legends are just stories, right? That's what I told myself as I zipped up my backpack, checked my flashlight, and locked my car at the trailhead. The sun was already dipping behind the hills, painting the sky in bruised purples and reds. I took a deep breath, the air sharp with the scent of pine and something else, something old, like the pages of a forgotten book that I'd come prepared. I had a tent, a sleeping bag rated for sub-zero temperatures, enough food and water for 2 days, and a handful of gadgets, a digital recorder, a thermal camera, and a notebook. I was determined to document everything, to prove once and for all that Black Hollow was just a forest, nothing more. My friends had laughed when I told them my plan. "You'll last an hour," they said. "You'll be running back to your car before midnight." I grinned and told them to keep their phones on, just in case I needed a ride home. But deep down, I was nervous. Not because of ghosts, but because of the unknown. There's a difference. The trail into Black Hollow is narrow, barely more than a deer path. The trees arch overhead, their branches tangled like the fingers of giants. Every step I took seemed to echo, the crunch of leaves and twigs unnaturally loud in the hush. I tried to keep my mind on practical things, how far I'd walked, how much daylight was left, and whether I'd remembered to pack extra batteries. But the forest had a way of creeping in, of making you forget the outside world. The deeper I went, the more the air seemed to thicken, as if I were wading through water instead of walking on dry land. About a mile in, I found the clearing I'd scouted on satellite maps. It was perfect, flat, sheltered by a ring of ancient oaks, with a small stream trickling nearby. I set up my tent, unrolled my sleeping bag, and arranged my gear in a neat semicircle. The sun was gone now, replaced by a pale, sickle moon. Shadows pooled between the trees, and the wind carried the distant cry of an owl. I forced myself to eat a granola bar, my appetite dulled by nerves. I checked my phone. No signal, of course. I was alone that I started my digital recorder, speaking into the darkness. It's 8:13 p.m. I'm in Black Hollow Forest, about a mile from the trailhead. The temperature is dropping, but I'm comfortable. No signs of wildlife yet, just the usual forest sounds. I'll check in every hour. My voice sounded small, swallowed by the night. I set the recorder on a stump and turned on the thermal camera, sweeping it in a slow arc. Nothing but the cool blue of the trees and the faint orange glow of my own body heat that I tried to relax, to let the forest settle around me. I read a few pages of a paperback, wrote some notes in my journal, and listened to the wind. But as the hours ticked by, the atmosphere began to shift. The normal sounds of the forest, crickets, frogs, and the rustle of small animals, faded away, replaced by a heavy silence. It was as if the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something to at 10:07 p.m. I heard the first sound that didn't belong. It was faint, almost lost in the wind, a whisper, like someone calling my name from far away. I froze, my heart thudding in my chest. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the mind. But then I heard it again, closer this time. "Eli." The voice was thin, reedy, and unmistakably human. I grabbed my flashlight and swept the beam across the trees, but there was nothing there. Just shadows and the endless, tangled undergrowth that I tried to laugh it off, to tell myself it was just the wind. But the fear was real now, crawling up my spine like a cold hand. I turned on the thermal camera again, scanning the perimeter of the clearing. For a moment, everything was normal. Then, in the far corner of the screen, a shape flickered, hot, bright red against the blue. It was gone in an instant, too fast to catch. I blinked, unsure if I'd really seen it that I spoke into the recorder, my voice shaking. It's 10:15 p.m. I just heard someone calling my name. I saw a heat signature on the thermal camera, but it disappeared. I'm going to stay alert and keep recording. I tried to sound calm, but I could hear the tremor in my words. The next hour passed in a blur of anxiety. Every snap of a twig, every sigh of the wind set my nerves on edge. I kept the flashlight in one hand, the camera in the other, scanning, always scanning. At 11:22 p.m., the temperature dropped suddenly, as if someone had opened a door to winter. My breath fogged in the air, and the hairs on my arms stood up. That's when I saw the figure. It stood at the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the trees. Tall, impossibly thin, with eyes that glowed like coals. It didn't move, didn't speak. I just watched. I couldn't breathe. I tried to lift the camera, but my hands were shaking too badly. The figure took a step forward, and the shadows seemed to ripple around it. I stumbled back, tripping over my own feet, and landed hard on the ground. When I looked up, it was gone. I lay there for a moment, my heart pounding so loudly I was sure it would echo through the trees. The cold from the ground seeped into my bones, but I barely noticed. My mind raced, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. Was it a trick of the light? A shadow cast by the moon? Or had I really seen something standing there, watching me with those burning eyes? I forced myself to sit up, brushing dirt from my hands. My flashlight beam trembled as I swept it across the clearing, searching for any sign of movement. The forest was silent again, the kind of silence that presses in on you, making you feel small and exposed. That I crawled back to my tent, every instinct screaming at me to run, to get out while I still could. But I'd promised myself I'd last the night. I zipped the tent shut, as if that thin layer of nylon could protect me from whatever was out there. I sat with my back against my pack, knees drawn to my chest, listening. The wind picked up, rattling the branches overhead. I tried to steady my breathing, to remind myself that I was safe, that nothing could get me in here. But the image of those eyes lingered, burned into my mind. Minutes dragged by, each one feeling like an hour. I checked the time, 11:37 p.m. I picked up the recorder, my voice barely above a whisper. It's almost midnight. I saw something. I don't know what it was. I'm going to stay in the tent for now. If anything else happens, I'll record it. I set the recorder down, my hand shaking. I reached for my phone, even though I knew there was no signal. The screen glowed in the darkness, a small comfort. Suddenly, a sound cut through the night, a low, guttural moan, rising and falling like the wind, but unmistakably alive. It came from deep in the forest, far enough away that I couldn't see the source, but close enough to make my skin crawl. I held my breath, straining to listen. The moan came again, closer this time, followed by the crack of a branch. I fumbled for the thermal camera, unzipping the tent just enough to poke the lens outside. The screen flickered, showing nothing but the cold blue of the trees. Then, for a split second, a shape darted across the edge of the clearing, tall, thin, and impossibly fast. That I ducked back inside, zipping the tent shut. My mind raced with possibilities. Was it an animal? A person? Something else? I tried to remember the stories I'd heard growing up, the tales of the Watcher, the spirits said to haunt Black Hollow. They said it could take any form, that it fed on fear. I'd always laughed at those stories, but now, alone in the dark, they didn't seem so funny. The moaning stopped as suddenly as it had started, replaced by a new sound, a soft, rhythmic tapping, like fingers drumming on wood. It came from just outside the tent. I froze, every muscle tensed. The tapping grew louder, more insistent. I reached for my flashlight, but the batteries had died. I cursed under my breath, fumbling for the spare set. The tapping stopped. Silence fell, heavy and absolute. That I waited, barely daring to breathe. Then, without warning, the tent shook violently, as if something had slammed into it. I yelped, scrambling backward. The walls of the tent bulged inward, pressed by invisible hands. I could hear breathing, deep, ragged, animalistic. I grabbed the recorder, my voice trembling. Something is outside the tent. It's trying to get in. I don't know what to do. The tent shook again, harder this time. I braced myself, ready to fight or flee. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, it stopped. The pressure vanished. The breathing faded. I sat in stunned silence, my heart racing. I waited for what felt like hours, but nothing happened. Slowly, I unzipped the tent and peered outside. The clearing was empty, the trees still and silent. I tried to steady myself, forcing slow breaths as I backed toward the fire. The flames flickered, casting long, dancing shadows that seemed to move on their own. I kept my eyes on the tree line, half expecting that face to reappear. But the forest was still, the only sound the crackle of burning wood and the distant trickle of the stream. I sat down, pulling my knees to my chest, and tried to make sense of what was happening. Was I hallucinating? Was the isolation playing tricks on my mind? Or was there really something out there, something that knew my name and wanted me to follow? I replayed the voice in my head. "Eli, come with us," and shivered. It hadn't sounded like a threat, but it hadn't sounded friendly either. There was a hunger in it, a longing that made my skin crawl. I picked up the recorder again, speaking softly. "It's almost 2 in the morning. I keep seeing things, faces, shapes in the trees. I hear voices calling my name. I don't know if I'm imagining it or if something is really here. I'm going to try to stay awake until dawn." I poked at the fire, feeding it another stick. The flames leapt higher, pushing back the darkness. I glanced at the thermal camera, but the battery was nearly dead. I switched it on anyway, scanning the clearing. For a moment, nothing. Then, at the edge of the screen, a cluster of heat signatures, small, flickering, like candle flames, appeared among the trees. I counted 5, maybe 6, all moving slowly toward the clearing. My breath caught in my throat. I set the camera down, not wanting to see any more. The air grew colder, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes your teeth chatter. I wrapped my arms around myself, wishing I'd brought a heavier jacket. The fire seemed to shrink, its warmth barely reaching me. I stared into the flames, trying to lose myself in their hypnotic dance. But the feeling of being watched never left me. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of movement in the corner of my eye, a shadow flitting between the trees, a pale hand reaching out and then vanishing. At 2:23 a.m., the voices returned. This time, they were louder, more insistent. "Eli, Eli, come with us." They echoed through the clearing, bouncing off the trees, coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I clapped my hands over my ears, but the voices only grew stronger, worming their way into my mind. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing them to stop. When I opened them, the fire had nearly died, reduced to a few glowing embers. I scrambled to my feet, desperate to keep the darkness at bay. I grabbed my flashlight, but the beam was weak, barely piercing the gloom. I stumbled to the tent, searching for more firewood. As I bent to pick up a fallen branch, I felt a cold hand brush against my ankle. I jerked upright, spinning around, but there was nothing there. Just the empty clearing, silent and still. I hurried back to the fire, tossing the wood onto the embers. Flames sputtered to life, casting wild shadows across the ground. I crouched beside the fire, hugging my knees, and tried to convince myself that I was safe. But the feeling of dread only grew, a heavy weight pressing down on my chest. I glanced at my watch, 2:41 a.m. The night felt endless, time stretching and warping until I wasn't sure how long I'd been there. Suddenly, a scream shattered the silence, a high, keening wail that seemed to come from everywhere at once. I froze, heart pounding, as the scream faded into a series of sobs. It sounded like a child, lost and afraid. I stood, torn between the urge to run and the need to help. The sobbing continued, growing fainter, as if moving deeper into the forest. I hesitated, then grabbed my flashlight and stepped toward the sound. The trees closed in around me, their branches clawing at my clothes. The beam of my flashlight danced across the undergrowth, illuminating twisted roots and tangled vines. The sobbing led me deeper into the woods, away from the safety of the fire. I called out, my voice trembling. "Hello? Is someone there?" The sobbing stopped. For a moment, there was only silence. Then, a whisper, so soft I almost missed it. "Eli, help me." I swallowed hard, forcing myself to keep moving. The forest felt alive, the trees pressing closer, the darkness growing thicker. I stumbled over a root, catching myself on a low branch. My flashlight flickered, then died, plunging me into darkness. I fumbled for the spare batteries, my hands shaking. As I worked, I heard footsteps behind me, soft, shuffling, getting closer. I spun around, but saw nothing. I managed to get the flashlight working again, the beam weak but steady. I swept it across the trees, searching for the source of the footsteps. The forest was empty, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. I backed away, retracing my steps toward the clearing. The voices followed me, whispering my name, urging me to stay. I ignored them, focusing on the path ahead. When I finally broke through the trees and into the clearing, I collapsed by the fire, gasping for breath. The voices faded, replaced by the crackle of flames and the distant call of an owl. I checked the time, 3:09 a.m. The night was almost over, but I knew the worst was yet to come. That I sat by the fire, shivering, my mind racing with everything I'd seen and heard. The forest felt different now, heavier, as if the trees themselves were leaning in, listening. I tried to convince myself that dawn was close, that the worst was behind me, but the darkness pressed in, thick and suffocating. I checked my recorder, replaying the last few entries. My own voice sounded foreign, strained with fear. I wondered if anyone would believe me if I made it out to tell the story. The fire was burning low again, and I forced myself to gather more wood. Every step away from the light felt like a risk, but I couldn't let the fire die. As I moved along the edge of the clearing, I caught a glimpse of something in the trees, a pale shape, drifting between the trunks that I froze, heart hammering, and watched as it moved closer. It was a woman, or at least it looked like one. Her dress was tattered, her hair long and tangled, her face hidden in shadow. She glided across the ground, her feet never touching the earth. That I backed away, stumbling over a root. The woman stopped at the edge of the clearing, her head tilting as if she were listening. I held my breath, afraid to move. She raised a hand, beckoning me forward. Her voice was a whisper, barely audible over the crackle of the fire. "Eli, come with me." The words sent a chill through me, colder than the night air. I shook my head, stepping back toward the fire. The woman's face twisted, her mouth opening in a silent scream. She faded into the trees, swallowed by the darkness. I collapsed by the fire, my hands shaking. I tried to make sense of what I'd seen, but my thoughts were jumbled, tangled like the branches overhead. I picked up the recorder, my voice barely steady. "It's almost 4. I don't know what I saw. A woman, maybe a ghost. She wanted me to follow her. I didn't. I stayed by the fire. I think that's the only reason I'm still here." I set the recorder down, staring into the flames. The fire was my lifeline, the only thing keeping the darkness at bay. The minutes crawled by, each one stretching longer than the last. I watched the sky, searching for any sign of dawn, but the darkness held firm. The voices returned, softer now, pleading. "Eli, please help us." I covered my ears, rocking back and forth, willing them to stop. The fire flickered, casting strange shapes on the ground. I thought I saw faces in the flames, twisted, desperate, reaching out for me that I squeezed my eyes shut, refusing to look. Suddenly, the wind picked up, swirling through the clearing and sending sparks flying. The fire roared to life, brighter than before. In the light, I saw them, figures standing at the edge of the clearing, dozens of them, their eyes glowing in the darkness. They watched in silence, unmoving, their faces blank and expressionless. I felt their gaze like a weight pressing down on me. Rooting me to the spot point, one of the figures stepped forward, a man this time, his features sharp and angular. He spoke, his voice echoing through the clearing. "You don't belong here, Eli. This place is not for the living." I tried to speak, but my mouth was dry, my tongue heavy. The man raised a hand, and the other figures began to close in, their movements slow and deliberate. I scrambled to my feet, backing away until I felt the heat of the fire at my back. The man stopped just outside the circle of light, his eyes locked on mine. "You were warned. Leave now and do not return." The other figures echoed his words, their voices blending into a single, mournful wail. I nodded, unable to speak, and the figures melted into the trees, their eyes lingering on me until the last one disappeared. The clearing was empty again, the fire burning low. I sat down, exhausted, my body aching with fatigue. I watched the sky, willing the first light of dawn to appear. Slowly, the darkness began to lift, the trees taking on shape and color. The voices faded, replaced by the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves in the morning breeze. When the sun finally rose, I packed my things in silence, my movements slow and deliberate. I left the clearing without looking back, following the trail through the trees. The forest felt different in the daylight, less menacing, almost peaceful. But I knew what I'd seen, what I'd heard. Black Hollow was haunted, and I was lucky to have survived the night. As I reached the edge of the forest, I paused, looking back one last time. The trees stood silent, their secrets hidden in the shadows. I took a deep breath, the air fresh and clean, and stepped into the sunlight. I'd survived a night in the most haunted forest, but I knew I'd never be the same. Some places change you, mark you in ways you can't see. Black Hollow was one of those places that I drove home in silence, the events of the night replaying in my mind. I listened to the recordings, the voices and sounds as clear as I remembered. I wrote down everything, every detail, determined to share my story. Maybe people would believe me, maybe they wouldn't. But I knew the truth. I'd faced the darkness and lived to tell the tale.